We're talking with Bev Hendry, who was Bev Sudvarg when she was at Crossroads a number of years ago, and when we were just in middle school, and we'll get into that. But first, Bev has a couple of questions for me.
I'm curious, are you still involved in the school? Are you still teaching?
No, but I will be in the fall, actually. I mean, I left after 15 years, 1989, and it really was primarily stress. I think that was true for both Carol and me, but more so for me. And um, there's so much I think that in time since then that I've learned about um, ways in which really to try to protect, preserve good mental health for teachers, for students. Um, but at the end, I was director of the school and teaching 5 classes at the same time, and that was not a good formula. But I kept my distance for a while, and I got excited for a couple of reasons recently. One is I really like the co-directors of the school, Mark Norwood and Sarah Pearson Wolf. And two is this number 50 came up, and there's so much of what transpired in the earlier years that nobody knows about, not remembered. So between these interviews and anybody who has memorabilia, or just anything they might want to share, it's like we're constructing something that was always there but hasn't been accessible. So that's a long answer to a great question.
No, it was a perfect answer.
Mhm.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So I assume Carol is no longer teaching.
I'm sorry. One more time.
Carol is no longer teaching either.
Well, Carol, unfortunately, she passed away a year ago, October.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
she and I got divorced a while back, and she did a lot of educational consulting, and she eventually moved back to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, your state, um, living with her mother, and she was not taking good care of herself, so she passed away a year ago, October. And if you remember Karen Techner, she did too, and Carmel Carlson, and what they all had in common was they were heavy smokers. So
Well, I
there.
wish I had known that Carol was so close because I'm like 25 miles from
Oh my
Lancaster.
God. Okay. Do you remember Jim Abbott? He was in the first graduating class, 82, but you were, in the school was on Lindell, right?
Right in the house.
Pardon?
It was on Lindell in the house. In
Yeah,
the
right.
house.
Right. So Jim may have come after you left. He also was from U City, and he lives in Lancaster now.
Oh, well,
He wrote a book about the Kennedy White House. I'll send you
okay.
a link about that. Okay. He's a
Yeah, I
museum
don't re
curator in Lancaster.
I do not recall that name. So our paths must not have crossed at the
Right.
time.
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of go backwards with where you are now. That's what I was going to start with. I want to start with um, St. Louis is always concerned about the brain drain. People who grow up in St. Louis and they have a lot to offer, but choose to move elsewhere. Um, can you tell us whether for you, leaving St. Louis was more being feeling pushed away or pulled away someplace else?
Well, I left St. Louis because my husband at the time got a job. He was in radio, and that job required a lot of moving around.
Hmm.
Um, and he got a job out here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So I came out here. So it wasn't really so much by choice, it was
Hmm.
by necessity. Um, and we raised our children out here. Now he and I are no longer together, although he still lives in the neighborhood, well, not the
All right.
neighborhood, but in the area as well. And I just ended up staying here, and I've been here now for 30 some years.
Terrific. That's terrific. Is there anything about St. Louis that you miss?
I miss my family because
Hmm.
all of my family lives either in St. Louis or Kansas City.
Hmm.
I miss the food. I mean, every time I go back, I'm back every year at Thanksgiving, if not twice a year. There's my favorite Chinese restaurant on Olive that has the best fried rice.
There you go.
My mother always sends me home with a gooey butter coffee cake. And then, of course, there's the toasted ravioli and emos. And all those things you can't get anywhere else but St. Louis. So I do miss those things.
That's fantastic. That's terrific. So let's uh, run the clock back a little bit, and if you don't mind telling us the circumstances under which you came to Crossroads, and let's just start with that, okay?
Okay. So I came to Crossroads in the 8th grade, so it would have 13. Yeah, about 13. I had heard about the school through a friend, um, Nicole, Nikki Levine
Oh,
was
okay.
going
Oh,
to school
wow.
there.
Nikki was
And
one of the originals, first year of the school. Yeah,
well, I think I came in the second or third year. I wasn't
maybe the
that.
third, because the second year was down in Laclede Town also, so it would have been the third year, which explains why you didn't know Jim because he came later.
Okay. So Nikki was going to school there, and she was a friend of mine. And she talked very highly about the school.
Mm.
And I was kind of struggling in middle school in U City, which is where I grew up. And so I asked my parents if we could check out the school because Nikki spoke so highly of it. So we came, I'm pretty sure we came to visit, and it just looked like a perfect fit for me. It was small. Um, the what you did in the classrooms was very catered to the students, what they were interested in, what they were good at, and not traditional, change classes and have to sit through, the math class and the English, although we did that kind of stuff, but
Yeah.
it was non-traditional. And at the time, I needed non-traditional.
So my recollection, Bev, is that you were a little bit rebellious, and you, which let me just say, in the vernacular of Crossroads, at least as we were then, that's a real positive, okay? Because if you thoroughly accepting the status quo, it can be boring and it doesn't lead to much in the way of change in a society which many of us believe does need change. So, that was very appealing to us about you because I think you were telegraphing that, and that was good. But would that, and if so, how did that uh, play into the decisions you made about coming to Crossroads and what happened elsewhere later?
Well, okay, rebellious is a good word for what I was. School was not my thing before
Hmm.
that. I was looking for a home. I had gone through some issues. All was good up until 6th grade. Grade
Hmm.
school was good. And we went to 6th grade, which was a whole different school, the middle school. And my best friend from 5th grade got into a group of very popular kids in 6th grade.
Hmm.
And I was not accepted into this group.
Oh, was
So
this Hanley or Brittany or
it was Brittany. Was
okay?
well, I think they called it the 6th grade center
Oh
at the
yeah, yeah.
time,
Okay, right.
but it was Brittany Middle School. And so I was looking for a home, so to speak, and I became friends with other rebellious children, and it just kind of blossomed from there. So
But
school
it's
was not
interesting,
really the place I wanted to be, but at 13, I still needed to be there. So that's how I ended up at Crossroads.
and it's interesting. I was earlier talking to a woman who came later to teach middle school with us on the Bolivar, and we were talking about just the attraction of middle school students, and that it's so much more real. The feelings are more transparent, and it's a time when a lot of students are open to talking about things that sometimes are hard to talk about at home or with friends. And the peer pressure can be so nasty. The Yeah.
It's
Um,
an awful time of life, middle school, awful.
Now you have children of your own, right?
I do. I have two daughters. They are grown. They're in their 30s now. One lives in Brooklyn and the other lives in Stockholm, Sweden.
Really? Wow. Well, uh, without getting into any detail, did they have difficulty at all in middle school? To what
They
do you
were,
attribute that they didn't then?
well, they went to a very small school. It was a public school, but their graduating class was like 80. It was a
Ah,
public school, but with a very private school feel to it because it was so
hmm.
small. Um, and I just lucked out, and maybe good parenting. I mean, they
Well,
were
you had to have
both
some
the
skill
straight
too.
and narrow children, um, top of their class, involved in all sorts of activities. So no, I
That's
didn't have
fantastic.
issues.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It did
Um,
not come back to bite me like my mother told me it would.
this is kind of like generational advancement, it sounds like, where things become a little easier for everyone and hopefully, you know, a higher degree of satisfaction. But so Crossroads did not have high school when you finished eighth grade. So did you go back to U City schools then? I'm trying to remember.
I did. I went back to U City schools. I did not do well. I went for ninth grade. They had an alternative school
Oh
at
yeah,
U City, which I went to. Um, and then after ninth grade, I really just kind of floundered. So it was unfortunate that Crossroads did not go through high
yeah,
school while I was there because I think that my high school time would have been much different.
interesting. So going back to Crossroads for the moment, are there any particular teachers who you remember or classes you remember?
Well, I remember Karen. She was, well, of course, you and Carol, I remember because you were like
Right.
everywhere all the time. Um, but Carol was one of my favorites, and there was also a teacher named Andy, and I don't remember Andy's last name,
Candy Knight. Yeah, she was
but
terrific. Yeah.
he was terrific. So I do remember them both as teachers. I can't pick out any specific classes or things that
Yeah,
I learned. It was a very long time ago.
it
Um,
was.
I mean, one of the things I remember the most was our eighth grade trip to Washington, D.C. We
Okay.
took the train across the country. It
Right.
was an all night train, and we had such a good time on the train getting there. And then our time in DC, it was fantastic. And that memory has stuck with me all these years.
It's such a shame that I think it was in the early 80s that Amtrak stopped running from St. Louis to DC or New York. Those were great trips. And I can't remember whether it was the trip that you're talking about. The train would go by 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania, the nuclear power plant. And it may have been, it would have been a trip in May, and that accident happened in March. And I remember whatever year it was that we went by there, everybody was just kind of spooked out. Oh my God, we're going to burn, we're going to radiate, whatever. Didn't turn out that way, but there were so many fun things on that. It was like a 24-hour train ride.
It was, I don't think any of us slept. I think we were
Yeah.
up just playing poker the whole time, and it was so much fun. And
Yeah. So, are there any particular students you recall or friendships that have lasted?
Krista Gilbert.
Oh, really? Good.
So Krista and I actually went to grade school together, and she was a friend of Nikki's as well. And we came to Crossroads together. My mom used to drop me off at her house on North and South in Pershing. Um, and we would take a city bus down to school. It
That
was
is
every day.
it's a constant theme I'm hearing here is people taking the bi-state bus and feeling okay with it.
I took the bi-state bus all the time back then. And she and I went to school back and forth together there. And not long after we finished Crossroads, she had moved away, so I lost touch with her. But then maybe 15 years ago, I think I found out that she was living in Baltimore, which was very close to me. So we used to meet regularly for lunch, two, three, four times a year for lunch, and stayed in touch. And then a few years ago, she moved to Atlanta. So I've not seen her since then, but we do still, our birthdays are 1 month apart, and we still, wish each other happy birthday every year and Christmas cards and such.
Well, that's really interesting. This kind of closes a particular loop because the last time I saw Krista was in Baltimore, maybe 15 years ago, maybe more, with Jim Abbott, who I was just speaking about, and Ellen Lehrman, who was also from U City and went to Crossroads. But Jim was curator of the Evergreen Museum, I think it was, at Hopkins. Um, and I don't remember exactly what Krista was doing, but she seemed to be very happy. And I'm, I, yeah, if you have contact information for her and you wouldn't mind sharing it, or you might want to
Okay.
ask her first, I'd love to bring her in on this loop. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
I've been forwarding your emails to her.
Good.
So
And so
I will definitely.
yeah, if you give me her email, that'd be great. Yeah. Um, that's really neat. So, as tell us about your work history. And I mean, obviously, being a parent is number one, but you sign on here and it says association manager. So, I don't think such a title exists when you're parenting. So, tell us about what you've done and what you're doing.
Okay. Well, before I had kids, I was a travel agent.
Okay.
Um, that was back in the day where there were travel agencies in
Right.
every strip mall,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the nail places now.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a travel agent. I did a lot of traveling. It was a great job while it lasted. They're kind of a thing of the past now. And I did have the opportunity to stay home with my kids for their first 10 years, which was the best job I had. And then after they were in school all day, I started in the association management world. So I have done work for journalists, for professional engineers, landscape architects, attorneys, and now I work for a surgical society. So
This
I'm,
is it.
I'm
Yeah. Well, so
so that
you've worked in a
that was
lot of professions. I mean, uh, is there has the work been pretty much the same at all of them, or are there real?
yeah. I mean, association management is pretty much the same regardless of what group you're working with. It's doing their meetings and taking care of their committees and their databases and their billing and the communications. And, it's all very similar.
I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but pre-pandemic, you'd be organizing a lot of gatherings, where
Yeah.
now so much of it's virtual.
Well, we've kind of gotten back to in person. So
Okay.
before the pandemic, I was working for the Pennsylvania Bar Association, which is attorneys, and I was
Hmm.
doing continuing education. So I was planning continuing education for attorneys required to get so many continuing education credits per year. And all of our programs were in person, either in the office or I traveled to and from Philly probably 2 or 3 times a month for that. Um, and then the pandemic hit and we worked exclusively from home and everything went virtual. So all of our meetings were via Zoom. And I found that I really liked working from home. So when they said that they were going to start having people come back to the office at the Bar Association, I decided to start looking around and seeing if I could find an association company that was strictly virtual.
And
So here
so,
I am.
terrific, terrific. So, I'm curious, when there's some people who think that when a lot of professional people get together, that it's mainly partying and gossiping, very little in the way of real work. You have been exposed to a lot of this. Where would you come on that? And I'm sure that's not all the same, but
Well, I think there's a lot to that. Um, Now, the current job I'm working with in the medical field, and they're a little bit more serious than the other professions because they do require a lot more continuing education.
right,
So the meetings that we have one big annual meeting every year, which I just came off of a couple weeks ago. Um, they were more serious about what they were doing, attending these sessions so they could get their credit. Um, but all the other professions, I would say that's true. When they got together, there was a lot of drinking. There's a lot of standing out in the hall, the sessions going on, chit chatting.
right.
It was just an
Interesting.
opportunity to get together and be social.
Yeah, yeah. Which obviously is really important. And so, would these be regional gatherings, or would they be national, or what?
Well, the current company that I'm at, which I'm hoping this is my last job because I'm
Yeah,
getting close to retirement age,
yeah.
um, it's an international organization.
Oh,
So we
okay.
have members from all over the world. Our annual meeting rotates between Chicago, DC, and San Diego. So, but we do have people coming from all over the world to come to this meeting. And
Are
there's like
there any
15,000.
stories you can tell about as a travel agent, uh, going places which were surprisingly good or surprisingly not so good?
Every place I went was fantastic.
Hmm.
Um, I got to go to Europe several times, all over the country, several cruises, um, several islands in the Caribbean. I I I can't think of anything that was bad. Yeah, I would say the worst one I went on was a cruise, and this was after my travel agency days. My husband and my kids, who were grade school at the time, took a cruise from New York Harbor up to Canada, and the weather was awful the entire
Oh,
week, and I was sick the whole time.
oh no.
But my kids had a great time; didn't bother them at all. So that was the worst thing that ever happened. So that's
So
pretty good.
okay, that's mighty good. So let me just pivot to something else at this point, and that would be, you are living in a very interesting time, and when we first came to know you, it was at a time where, in education, there were more alternatives. That in terms of viewing how a society should operate, there were a lot of people who I think were very compassionate and wanted to make sure that as many people as possible got access to the best education, healthcare, whatever it might be. And there's still many people like that now. But I'm wondering, if you feel comfortable sharing any thoughts you might have about kind of how our society has changed, is changing, might change. It's a big question, and
It is a
punting is
big
fine.
question. I mean, of course, living is a whole lot more expensive now. Um, the safety out in the world isn't like it was. I mean, some of the things that I did when I was 13 years old, I can't imagine my kids having been allowed to do the things that I did back then. Um,
Interesting,
so
yeah.
that's definitely has changed in the world. You have to be so much more careful now than you were back
Right.
then. Or or maybe not, but we weren't. I mean, it wasn't in our face all the time then as it is now. I mean, it probably existed, but we weren't as aware of it. And then we have an election coming up, and who knows what's going to happen in November. My husband and I are not on the same page politically. Um, and I can let you surmise which sides we're on based on my path.
Yeah.
So, I am curious and a little afraid of what the world's going to look like after November 6th. And I'm not sure, does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. I do want to ask a follow-up. Again, feel free to punt on it, but it would be this, that in a because we're going to have people watching this who are younger and wondering, what do people who are kind of like me do as they get older? So the question is, uh, being in a marriage with different political views, right? Any words of advice you can share with others about how to make that work?
Don't talk about it.
Okay, that sounds
I mean,
good.
we do have heated discussions sometimes, but invariably one of us gets upset, depending on what direction the conversation goes, and it's not worth it. It's really not worth
Yeah, yeah.
discussion. I mean, he can find people who is of like mind to him as far as his political views. And my family, I mean, I grew up in a very liberal household.
Hmm.
So that's what I know. That's how I was raised. That's my mindset. And my kids have that. I mean, they're not political at all, but they were raised in a liberal household as well.
Yeah,
Um, so I have people that I can talk to and
right.
see things the way I see them and will agree and discuss. So it's not necessary to do it with my husband.
Want to ask you one other question about the future, and this is kind of something, for the archives, people looking at it 5, 10, however long it is. You want to share any thoughts you might have about artificial intelligence and where it may be taking us?
I don't have a lot of thoughts about that because it's just now getting started. Um, there's a lot of that coming up in the medical world, which is
Yeah,
the world that I'm in right now. And we just started a task force to start discussing how that's going to look like in the medical world. Um, so I unfortunately I really don't have an opinion either way because I am not very educated on the subject right now.
I
So,
think I think most people are not, but whether we like it or not, we that's kind of the world that we're in, and we'll see what we can do. Well, this has been good, really good. Is there anything you'd like to say to people who've been at Crossroads, were at Crossroads when you were there, who are there now, will be there in the future? Anything that we haven't covered that you've been thinking, oh, I really want to make sure I say this or that?
well, is Crossroads, what kind of school is it now? Is it very much like it was when I was there?
It's such a good question. I'm gonna say, and I am not as clued in as other people are, but I'm gonna say now it's more so the way it was in the beginning than it was, let's say, 5 or 10 years ago. Um, but it's something that all of us who had something to do with that before need to really work on to keep those parts that are really good. Um, so and just I think perhaps implicit in your question and things I've heard from others are, I really liked Crossroads the way it was. I hope it's fairly similar, for students now. And I think the school really is invested in trying to make that happen now.
And is it just high school,
It's middle school and high school.
middle school? And
Right.
well, then the piece of advice I would give to those current students or students considering coming is take advantage of everything that the school has to offer because it's so much different in a big public school. And it could make a huge difference in your future and how you look at things. If you are in a school where you live at school every day, all day for how many years, take full advantage of what they have to offer.
That's terrific, though. It's, I think, such strong advice, and so often when you're in school, it's hard to see outside that bubble